Today, our slideshow, our lecture is about lesson planning. Lesson planning is a very important aspect for you guys. Um, we've been talking a lot about teaching and learning, about the current context in which you are operating, and we need to think about that. The global economy, the technology, the needs of young people, the diverse social groups, the conflicting tensions of human activity. We need to be showing regard for individual and group differences in education. We need to be thinking very much about where education is today, so that we can provide the most appropriate experiences for our students. If you want to teach in ways that are consistent with the curriculum and with the principles of effective teaching and learning, then we have to plan thoroughly. Some of this planning is onerous, but it's necessary. We know that at times unplanned learning can occur, and when such opportunities arise, we should help our students to take advantage of those opportunities. However, in general, if we do not plan for and create learning opportunities that make direct and obvious connections between what you do lesson by lesson and what the curriculum suggests students should learn in the long term, your students will not achieve the learning goals that we aim for through the curriculum. Research into human learning has identified general principles of learning and teaching that have the capacity to improve levels of student achievement in our schools. These writers, Brainsford, Brown and Cocking, have done a lot of research, and their book, How People Learn, identifies three important principles of learning. Learning experiences relate to students' readiness. We have to work out where our students are at. Learning is more effective when it leads to deep understanding of subject matter, and it's also more effective when learners are supported. This is part of our role. There is an important difference between learning to teach and practicing your craft as a competent teacher. The things that we do are designed to build competence. No matter what level of expertise a teacher has, thoughtful teacher planning helps to make the student learning more purposeful, effective and efficient. So we will be aiming to develop the process of detailed plans that actually are going to help us to clarify what we want students to learn, and also to help us to consider the multiple ways of helping these students achieve those goals. Assessment is something that we will be looking at later on down the track. It does support a learning-oriented culture rather than a performance-oriented culture. It's not how have you performed on what I've just taught you, but where are you at in your learning. Motivation is a crucial aspect of our teaching, and we talk about how can we engage our students, how can we get our students interested. It's a difficult concept, but one which we need to think carefully about. Again, we have to be motivated. Motivated teachers feel they can help students learn. If the students are motivated and interested in what they want to learn, it makes our job easier. There are lots of reading that you can do about motivation, and it is something that you should consider when you are preparing your lessons. How am I going to ensure that my students will want to participate in this lesson? It is true that all right, now I have here a slide with the standards. That these ones are actually taken from the New South Wales standards, and of course we have the national standards now. The point I'm trying to make here is that our planning should consider all of these things, and they are standards that we are, as teachers, are expected to meet. So we really have no choice. We do have to think about these issues. We have to know our students, we have to plan, and we have to maintain supportive and safe learning environments. Our curriculum is written for New South Wales by the New South Wales Board of Studies, and they write and endorse all the courses that we teach. And then, of course, we have the school systems that the DT or DEC, as it is now, the CEO and the AIS, that are responsible for implementing the syllabus. They are the ones that employ us, and then it is our job to implement that syllabus. Our syllabus is organised into stages, as we've talked about before, and we need to understand each of those stages. We've also talked about the new national curriculum that's going to become important to us. We are very fortunate in our subject area that that national curriculum actually slots very well into our syllabus, and we wouldn't be anticipating any big changes to come into particularly the design and technology area. Now, it's obviously that a good lesson plan is no guarantee of a successful lesson, as you never know what's going to happen. But it's equally obvious that few lessons will be successful if they have not been carefully planned. We have different types of lessons: theory, practical, field trip, project-based, and so on, and different teaching strategies. Direct instruction, group work, practical work will require different approaches. But there are a number of steps that we can use to ensure that we plan carefully. This is just one list of types of lessons that we will be developing. Each time we develop a lesson, we'll be thinking about what type of lesson it will be. And at times we will combine all of these into the one type, or perhaps not all of them, but some of them into the one type of lesson. We have to consider our learners. Where are they at? How do they learn? How can we provide the best quality environment for them? We have to consider ourselves, our own strengths, the knowledge that we have of the content, the resources that are available to us, and at all times we must be considering, how will I know that the students have learnt? How will I assess? There are other aspects of the context in which we work that we need to think about when we're planning our lessons. The school will have a specific philosophy, as an understanding of what you're going to be teaching, and you are required to do that. The resources provided by the school have a big impact on how we plan our lessons. But the bottom line is we have to do as the syllabus says. Now, determining the content for our lesson is very important. What will they learn? What will they produce? Written, oral, create? This will relate to the outcomes and consequently to the learn tos and the learnabouts. How well do you want your students to be able to do something, to know something? How will you know that they have achieved what you wanted them to do? It's important to be clear about why you are teaching whatever you are teaching. Why each particular lesson is important. So you will also consider, what will the students do after the lesson? What is it preparing them for? What new concepts or skills will be introduced in this lesson? And why is this the most appropriate time to introduce them? How will this lesson build on students' prior knowledge and understandings? How does this lesson relate to the rest of the subject and to subjects that the students are studying? What are the likely consequences if students do not master the understandings and skills that are the focus of this lesson? It's a lot to consider when you think about your outcomes that you want students to achieve. You need to ask yourself the question, what do I want them to achieve at the end of the lesson? What knowledge and insights do I want my students to acquire? What skills do I want the learners to be able to demonstrate? What attitudes, dispositions, values do I want them to have? How is all of this knowledge, the skills and the attitudes related to the content and to the achievement of those standards? Why are these outcomes relevant for the students? Can they be demonstrated in a tangible way? Are they fair and equitable? There's a lot to consider when you are planning these lessons, and as time goes by, you'll become more experienced at actually doing these, planning these lessons and knowing what you have to put in. After you have thought about the outcomes and what you want your students to learn, you will more than likely move on to the instructional procedures. Of course, the resources will have an impact, but the most important thing for you to be considering will be how you will actually teach that content. What teaching strategies will you learn? Not what you will learn, not teaching strategies will you use to enhance the students' learning. So you'll be thinking about providing opportunities for the students to think and to reason, to debate their understanding. You'll deliberately create these opportunities by employing specific teaching strategies that not only fit with the content that you're considering, but also the learners that you're working with. You choose teaching strategies according to what it is that you want learners to be able to do as a result of your teaching. So you ask yourself when you are planning, what learning experiences will make it easy for students to achieve the lesson outcomes? You also need to keep in mind that students need adequate opportunities and time to construct their understanding. Learning is a social cultural experience, so you have to create opportunities for appropriate interactions between students. Also, learners are individuals, so a one-size-fits-all lesson will not give equal learning opportunities to all students. It's a big ask, isn't it? Different teaching strategies are simply different ways of helping students to learn, different ways of helping them to achieve their outcomes, the ones that you have selected. Now, teaching is often described as either teacher-centred or learner-centred, and that convention is continued today and in our approaches to teaching. The teacher plays a more direct role than in other approaches, but we have to also remember that today there's a big emphasis on developing those student-based learning experiences. Cooperative learning is another example of a learner-centred approach. So when you're using learner-centred approaches to teaching, you'll set the learning agenda that you will have, and you will have much less direct control over what and how students learn. Monitoring what they are doing and how they're learning will be an important part of that. No teaching strategy is better than others, and I would encourage you to try as many different teaching strategies as you can in your lessons and attempt to have as many different experiences and give your students as many different experiences as you can. Now, ACU has a specific lesson plan format that you're going to have to use in your practicum, and there are things that you have to, information that you have to provide for your supervising teacher. Obviously the class, the date, when the lesson starts, when it finishes, the key learning area, in our case is TAS, Technological and Applied Studies, the lesson topic, just so that you can narrow it down to the concept or the content that you're trying to teach. The other area that you have to include is recent prior experience. You have to think about how the student's prior knowledge and experience will actually impact on the lesson. What experiences do they need in order for you to be able to teach that lesson? Now, it's important here to note that you are asked to actually list relevant concepts, skills and values that the students have already experienced. So it is an important aspect of your lesson, and it should be one that you consider each time you do your lesson plan. When you, in your lesson plan, you are asked to list the syllabus outcomes, it says one or two only. It says to write them out in full. You will be, when you're selecting your lesson, your syllabus outcomes, you won't be trying to cover a number. In one lesson, you won't be trying to cover all of the syllabus outcomes. Obviously, you might have a lesson where you're touching on many of them, but you will have a focus on specific outcomes. No more than two. Remember that it does say don't try and incorporate more than two outcomes into one lesson. Do two well before you try and get too many. Now, the indicators are very important. They are the behaviours that tell us that the students have achieved those outcomes. They must be specific. You must be able to observe that behaviour that's going to give you the information to tell you that the students achieved the outcome. So they are listed there. So that's what you're going to be looking for to see if these students have achieved your outcomes. We're very fortunate in the technology mandatory syllabus where they are listed, many of those indicators are listed very specifically under the Learn About and the Learn To of the aspect of the syllabus. So you can look up your outcome and you can see what the students are expected to know and what they're expected to be able to do. The language used in those Learn Tos and Learn Abouts will be good for you to be able to transfer to these indicators of learning, but there will be other indicators of learning that you might include. So those are the indicators of learning, and then we have a list that tells us what you want those students to do by the end of the lesson. Now, assessment is an important aspect of every lesson. How will you know that the students have achieved the outcomes? We will be talking more about assessment later, but as soon as you start doing your first lesson plan, and I believe many of you have already done them, you are going to have to list the strategies that you will use to assess them. It may be that they're going to do a written test. It may be just that you're going to be observing them participating in a particular outcome. It may be that you're going to be listening to a discussion. It may be that they're going to answer specific questions. What's going to happen so that you can assess those learners? Now, in our lesson plans, it asks for us to list any safety issues. That's a very important aspect in technology education. You will have specific safety issues related to any practical lessons that you give. You are also asked to list the resources. Now, don't forget that it's both human and non-human resources. So it may be that you actually consult with your supervising teacher, and that will be human resource. It may be that you've been speaking to a designer about a particular aspect of design. It may be that you've got specific resources that you've brought in just for this lesson, for the lesson preparation. So you need to think carefully about what resources. Now, by planning this, by writing these things down, you will be ensured that you have them ready when you do your lesson. The next aspect of the lesson is the lesson sequence itself. Now, this is a very detailed part of your lesson plan. You have a column for lesson content or indicators of learning. That is where you write what is taught. Now, what is taught will link to those indicators of learning that you've listed previously. So I should be able to look at your lesson content and I should be able to say, oh yes, I can see the relationship between what you are teaching and what your indicators of learning were. Make sure that they marry up. Timing is crucial. We don't always stick to our timing because, as you know, it's unpredictable how a lesson is going to go in many occasions. But you need to plan carefully. If your lesson is 45 minutes, then you need to know that you have allowed 45 minutes. You need to also make plans if the lesson finishes early or if it goes over time. Where is the best time to stop? You need to keep track of that timing. As you become more experienced, you'll get better at that. Now, beside each indicator of learning, you're going to list the learning experiences. In other words, what are you doing and what is the students doing? What are the students doing? Now, we'll be looking at an example in our tutorial where we'll be listing those behaviours. It is what shows really careful planning. Those things that are happening under the teaching strategies and learning experiences column will relate directly to your lesson content, and the timing that you have put down will also show that you have an understanding of that strategy or that learning experience. So if you're going to be running a discussion about a particular topic under the lesson content, you will have the questions you are going to be asking. Under the strategies comment, you might have that the teacher is leading the discussion with the questions, that the students are contributing to the discussion with their answers, and the timing. You need to think carefully how long you're going to spend on this particular aspect of your lesson. If it's the body of the lesson, it might be 20 minutes. But if it's just a quick introduction to the lesson, it might be 2 minutes. You'll have another column where you will actually list your resources and your organisation so that you know when you need to have specific resources ready for the lesson. So if there's worksheets or there's access to the computers, you need to know that that's there. How you're actually going to organise the students. If they're going into groups, how are you putting them into groups? There's a lot to think about. Now, the lesson introduction is, of course, a very important aspect of your lesson, and one that needs to be thought through carefully. It needs to involve the learners. You want to draw them into the learning experience. Some lesson introductions might relate to a previous lesson or an excursion or a presentation the students have been involved in. Sometimes it just is the spontaneity at the beginning that will encourage the students to engage in the learning. But you will consciously make steps to ensure that your introduction will engage your students. You might be setting up a display of the materials related to the topic, or you might be showing a video or playing some music. You might have a lot of sounds from a particular environment and have the students discuss what the sounds are. It'll be something that you'll be using to engage those students in whatever it is that you're going to be teaching about. You want to make sure that that introduction is at the student's level, that it relates to the work being investigated, that it's interesting, that it sparks an interest, and that it seems spontaneous. Even though you have spent so long planning this introduction, you want to make sure that it just appears to the students that it's a spontaneous response by you. Now, there are a number of different teaching strategies that we talk about. There's a lot to consider here when we are looking at teaching strategies. There's a lot of reading that you can do about teaching strategies. You want to provide the most effective way for your students to have the opportunities to think and to reason and to debate. It's very important to remember that no particular teaching strategy is better than any other. You will choose the one that suits your students' learning, but also suits your way of teaching as well. Now, there's a number of different taxonomies of learning that are presented in different books by different people, and they give us a good grounding to use for developing our lessons. Most of them began from the work of Benjamin Bloom, and many of them are known as Bloom's taxonomy and various adaptations of Bloom's taxonomy. So Benjamin Bloom is the person who's the best known, but Anderson and Crathwell and Mazzano are other people who have developed taxonomies that will help you to think about your teaching and how to plan your lessons. They will talk about how to develop activities and questions to focus on the fundamentals to learning. And it Bloom's in particular and the adaptations of his taxonomy do provide us with some strategies that we can employ whenever we're planning our lessons. Questioning in particular, this is based on some aspects of Bloom's taxonomy. You can see many of his words in there. Critical thinking, comprehension, application. So when we are asking questions, if examples given here with a knowledge question that's just recalling information, like what year did Captain Cook land in Australia? If we're trying to develop that skill of comprehension, what is the main idea that's presented in this graph? Or applying information. If something, then something, or why. Apply that information is what you do when you get the children to, the students to find information and apply it to a certain task to show their understanding. We want them to think critically, and so we will often ask questions that require analysis. An example given here is, after reflection on the content of several reports, is cooperation between nations a viable option? Synthesis, forming new patterns with different elements. So how could a community-based school be organised? Students would have to synthesise their information. Evaluation, making judgments. We do a lot of that in our particular subject areas. ICT should be incorporated into your lessons, but you need to be thinking constantly, is this the best way for us to use ICT? Is the use of ICT actually going to enhance learning, or am I just using it for the sake of it because it's there? Think very carefully about how and why you are using ICT. Now, we've talked about the lesson, the need to have a good introduction to our lesson, but we need, although the conclusion may be very short, we need to have a lesson conclusion as well. Sometimes we might recap on what's occurred during the lesson, or we might have some students to display their work or discuss it. If the lesson relates to a following lesson, we might discuss the fact that it leads into the next lesson, or you might provide a quick game to bring, or an activity to bring the students back together again before you dismiss them. You certainly want to check that the students have completed the work to the level which you expected. And the main thing is, we want the students to go away from your lesson wanting to come back to the next one. Now, these are just the generic components of a lesson plan that have been set up by Price and Nilsson, and we need to, when we have planned our lessons, we need to think carefully, have I included all of these aspects? Now, in your case, you have a template that the university provides for us to use. That template has been designed so it can be used by primary and secondary pre-service teachers, and also across all subject areas. So it's not designed specifically for our subject area, and there may be aspects that we want to add to, but the requirement is for our practicum that we use this particular plan. So you can add to, but you can't delete. Lesson planning is going to be an important aspect for you, and I wish you every success. It is not easy. You will get better at it. As you start off and you think, am I going to have to do this for every lesson forever? The answer is no. But certainly initially, you need to put a lot of time and effort into that lesson planning so that you can be ensured that you have a great that you have planned well, and at least if something does go wrong, it's not because you didn't plan. Good luck with your lesson planning, everyone.